Brock Lesnar face-to-face with Drew McIntyre.
The date was January 16th, 2026, and Monday Night Raw was unfolding in typical fashion. The crowd was hot, the energy was palpable, and the wrestling world had no idea they were about to witness one of the most shocking returns in recent memory. Sometimes in professional wrestling, you can feel when something big is about to happen. The air changes, the atmosphere becomes charged with electricity, and every person in the arena seems to collectively hold their breath in anticipation of the unknown. This was one of those nights, though nobody could have predicted just how explosive things were about to become. Drew McIntyre stood in the center of the ring, looking every bit the dominant force he's become in WWE. The Scottish Warrior has transformed himself into one of the company's most reliable main event stars, a physical specimen who combines raw power with surprising agility and undeniable charisma. His presence alone commands attention, his voice booms through arenas with authority, and his Claymore kick has put down some of the biggest names in the industry. On this particular night, he was cutting a promo about his future, about championships, about proving that he belongs at the very top of the WWE hierarchy. The crowd was engaged with everything Drew was saying, hanging on his words, responding to his passion and intensity. He spoke about overcoming obstacles, about fighting through adversity, about earning respect rather than demanding it. His Scottish accent gave extra weight to his declarations, his physical presence made every threat feel legitimate, and his track record made every claim feel credible. This was Drew McIntyre in his element, doing what he does best, connecting with an audience and building towards something significant. But then something happened that changed everything. The lights in the arena suddenly cut to black, plunging thousands of fans into complete darkness. For a moment, there was confusion, murmurs rippling through the crowd as people tried to understand what was happening. Was this a technical malfunction? Was it part of the show? The uncertainty lasted only seconds, but those seconds felt like an eternity, the anticipation building with each passing moment. Then the music hit. Those familiar, ominous tones that every wrestling fan recognizes instantly. The entrance theme that has signaled destruction and chaos for over 2 decades. The sound that makes crowds explode and opponents' blood run cold. Brock Lesnar's music thundered through the arena's sound system, and the reaction was instantaneous and deafening. The crowd erupted into a roar that could probably be heard for miles, a mixture of shock, excitement, and sheer disbelief at what was happening. Brock Lesnar had not been seen in WWE for months. His last appearance had ended with questions about when or if he would return, with speculation running rampant about his future in professional wrestling. Some believed he was done, that he had accomplished everything there was to accomplish and had no reason to come back. Others held out hope that the Beast incarnate would eventually return to wreak havoc once more. But nobody expected it to happen tonight, on a random episode of Raw in January, with no build-up or forewarning. The lights came back up, and there he stood at the top of the entrance ramp. Brock Lesnar, looking every bit as intimidating and dangerous as he ever has. His physical presence is something that transcends normal description. He's a legitimate athlete, a former UFC heavyweight champion, a genetic freak who combines size, strength, speed, and legitimate fighting ability in a way that few humans ever have. His shoulders are impossibly broad, his arms look like they could break bones with minimal effort, and his face carries an expression of controlled violence that makes him look less like an entertainer and more like a predator. Paul Heyman was not with him. This detail was significant. For years, Heyman has been Lesnar's advocate, his mouthpiece, the man who speaks for the Beast and builds anticipation for his destruction. But tonight, Lesnar stood alone, which somehow made him seem even more dangerous. There was no warning, no eloquent introduction, no carefully crafted promo building toward violence. Just Brock Lesnar, standing alone, his eyes locked on the ring where Drew McIntyre stood. Drew's expression had transformed from confident to alert. The Scottish warrior is not one to back down from anyone, and his body language showed he was ready for a fight. He dropped the microphone, the sound echoing through the arena, and began removing his jacket, preparing for what seemed like an inevitable confrontation. The crowd was on their feet now, the noise level increasing with each passing second, everyone in the building understanding they were about to witness something special. Brock began his walk to the ring. His movement is distinctive, a bouncing, predatory stride that makes him look like he's barely containing his own power. He doesn't pose for the crowd, doesn't acknowledge their reactions, doesn't play to the cameras. He's completely focused on the ring, on his target, on the violence he's about to unleash. Each step brings him closer, and the tension builds exponentially, the anticipation becoming almost unbearable. Drew positioned himself in the center of the ring, ready, waiting. You have to give credit to the Scottish warrior's courage. Many men would have rolled out of the ring, created distance, bought time. But Drew McIntyre has built his reputation on being fearless, on facing any challenge head-on never backing down regardless of the odds. He stood his ground, watching Lesnar approach, his fists clenched, his body coiled and ready to explode into action. Brock reached the ring and paused at the steps, looking up at Drew with an expression that was utterly unreadable. Was this going to be a respectful confrontation between two top-level competitors? Would they have words before any physicality began? Would this turn into a match? The possibilities hung in the air for just a moment, that pregnant pause before chaos erupts. Then Brock exploded into action with a speed that seemed impossible for a man of his size. He charged up the steps and into the ring with the intensity of a freight train, covering the distance in a heartbeat. Drew attempted to meet him with offense, throwing a punch aimed at Lesnar's head, but the beast ducked under it with surprising agility and immediately closed the distance between them. What happened next was a masterclass in legitimate fighting ability applied to professional wrestling. Brock grabbed Drew around the waist and effortlessly lifted all 265 pounds of the Scottish warrior off his feet. Drew's eyes went wide with shock at how easily Lesnar had manhandled him. Before he could even attempt to counter, Brock launched him across the ring with a belly-to-belly suplex that sent Drew flying through the air like he weighed nothing. The impact of Drew's body hitting the canvas echoed through the arena. He crashed down hard, the ring shaking from the force of the landing. But there was no time to recover, no moment to catch his breath or regroup. Brock was already on him, grabbing him again before he could even fully process what had happened. The beast's hands locked around Drew's waist once more, and despite Drew's attempts to block or counter, Lesnar lifted him again with that same terrifying ease. Another belly-to-belly suplex sent Drew flying in the opposite direction. His body crashed into the turnbuckles this time, the collision sending shockwaves through his spine. The crowd was going absolutely insane, the noise level reaching a fever pitch as they watched Brock Lesnar systematically destroy one of WWE's top stars. This wasn't a competitive fight. This was a statement. This was Brock Lesnar reminding everyone exactly who he is and what he's capable of. Drew tried to create separation, rolling toward the ropes, attempting to use them to pull himself up and get his bearings. But Brock gave him no quarter, no opportunity to recover. He stalked Drew like a lion pursuing wounded prey, closing the distance with those same bouncing steps, that same predatory energy. Drew attempted to fight back, throwing desperate strikes from his compromised position, but Lesnar absorbed them like they were nothing, like he barely felt them at all. Brock grabbed Drew again, this time positioning him for a German suplex. The Scottish warrior tried to hook his leg around Lesnar's to block the move, a veteran counter attempt, but the beast's strength was simply too much. Brock powered through the attempted block and launched Drew overhead with a released German suplex that sent the big Scotsman crashing down on the back of his head and shoulders. The sickening impact made even hardened wrestling fans wince, the violence of it crossing that line between worked performance and genuinely dangerous. But Lesnar wasn't finished. Not even close. He pulled Drew up again, the Scottish warrior now clearly dazed and struggling to defend himself. Brock hoisted him up and delivered another German suplex, this one with even more velocity and impact than the previous one. Drew's body folded up on itself as he crashed down, his neck bending at an angle that made the entire arena gasp in collective concern. The pattern continued. Brock pulled Drew up and delivered another German suplex. Then another. Then another. It became a horrifying rhythm, a systematic destruction that went beyond typical wrestling assault. Each suplex looked worse than the last, each impact more devastating, each moment more difficult to watch. Drew's body was being broken down systematically, his ability to defend himself diminishing with each brutal throw. The crowd's reaction had evolved from excitement to genuine concern. You could hear it in their voices, see it in their faces. This had crossed from entertaining violence into something that felt genuinely dangerous. Wrestling fans are accustomed to seeing performers take punishment, but there's usually a give and take, a back and forth that makes it feel competitive. This was just destruction, pure and simple, and it was uncomfortable to witness. After what must have been at least 8 consecutive German suplexes, Brock finally released Drew, letting the Scottish warrior's lifeless body collapse to the canvas. Drew lay motionless, clearly hurt, possibly unconscious, his body positioned awkwardly in the center of the ring. Medical personnel began making their way toward ringside, their presence adding another layer of realism to the assault, making it feel less like a wrestling angle and more like a legitimate medical emergency. But Brock Lesnar was not done sending his message. He looked down at Drew's broken body with an expression of satisfaction mixed with something darker, something more sinister. He backed up a few steps, positioning himself, measuring the distance. The crowd understood what was coming before it happened, their noise level increasing again, a mixture of anticipation and dread filling the arena. Brock charged forward and leaped into the air, driving his full 286 pounds down onto Drew's ribs with a devastating jumping knee drop. The impact was sickening, Drew's body convulsing from the blow, his face contorting in pain even through what appeared to be unconsciousness. The move looked less like a wrestling maneuver and more like someone trying to genuinely injure another human being. Lesnar stood up and looked down at his handiwork, then decided to deliver another knee drop. And another. And another. Each one targeted Drew's ribs, the vulnerable midsection that was already compromised from the countless suplexes. You could almost hear the air being driven from Drew's lungs with each impact, his body curling instinctively to protect itself even as consciousness seemed to escape him. The commentators at ringside were beside themselves, their voices reaching frantic levels as they called for someone to stop this assault. They spoke about Drew's family, about the danger he was in, about how this had gone far beyond acceptable even by wrestling's violent standards. Their genuine concern added another layer of realism to the moment, making viewers at home question whether this was part of the show or something that had genuinely gone wrong. Finally, Brock seemed satisfied with the damage he had inflicted. He stood over Drew's motionless form one last time, looking down with that same unreadable expression, then raised his fists in the air in his signature pose. His music hit again, but it felt almost inappropriate now, a celebratory theme playing over what had been a one-sided destruction that looked more like assault than wrestling. Medical personnel rushed into the ring as soon as Brock exited, immediately attending to Drew. They were checking his neck, his spine, his ribs, calling for additional assistance. The seriousness of their actions, the speed with which they worked, the concern visible on their faces, all contributed to the atmosphere of genuine emergency that had descended over the arena. Brock walked up the entrance ramp without looking back, his job done, his message sent. The Beast Incarnate had returned, and he had reminded everyone in the most brutal way possible exactly what he's capable of. There was no celebration in his demeanor, no playing to the crowd, no acknowledging their reaction. He had come to destroy Drew McIntyre, and he had accomplished exactly that. As Drew was carefully loaded onto a stretcher, the full extent of what had happened began to sink in for everyone watching. This wasn't a competitive segment where both men got their offense in. This wasn't a brawl that could have gone either way. This was Brock Lesnar making an example of Drew McIntyre, using the Scottish warrior's body to send a message to the entire WWE locker room that the Beast is back and more dangerous than ever. The stretcher was carefully wheeled up the entrance ramp, Drew showing minimal signs of consciousness, his body strapped down to prevent any movement that might exacerbate potential injuries. The crowd gave him a respectful ovation, recognizing his toughness in taking such a beating, sympathizing with the punishment he had endured. It was a somber moment, the excitement of Lesnar's return tempered by genuine concern for Drew's well-being. Social media exploded immediately. Clips of the assault were shared thousands of times within minutes, with fans and media personalities weighing in on what they had witnessed. The return of Brock Lesnar trended worldwide, dominating conversations not just in wrestling circles, but across broader sports and entertainment platforms. Everyone was talking about it, analyzing it, debating what it meant for the future of WWE. The questions came fast and furious. Why had Brock targeted Drew specifically? What had motivated this return and this particular attack? Was this personal, or was Drew simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? The lack of explanation, the absence of Paul Heyman to provide context, made the assault feel more random and therefore more frightening. Brock Lesnar had returned not to chase a championship or settle a specific score, but seemingly just to hurt someone, and that made him feel more dangerous than any storyline motivation could have. Wrestling analysts immediately began speculating about the implications for WWE's championship picture. Brock Lesnar's returns always shake up the hierarchy, his presence forcing everyone else to adjust their plans and expectations. If Drew McIntyre was going to be out of action due to the injuries sustained in this attack, it would create a vacuum in the upper card that would need to be filled. And if Drew returned seeking revenge, it would set up a feud that could main event any premium live event. The brutality of the assault also sparked conversations about the direction of WWE's content. The company has been trying to maintain a balance between appealing to families while still providing the edge and intensity that core wrestling fans crave. This segment definitely leaned more toward the latter, with a level of violence and one-sided destruction that pushed boundaries. Some fans loved it, praising WWE for not sanitizing Lesnar's character and allowing him to be the destructive force he's supposed to be. Others questioned whether such extreme violence was necessary or appropriate. Behind the scenes, one had to imagine the WWE locker room was buzzing with reaction. Wrestlers would be processing what they had seen, understanding that Brock Lesnar's return changes everything for everyone. Some would see it as an opportunity, a chance to test themselves against the ultimate measuring stick. Others would recognize the danger, understanding that being in a program with Lesnar means taking significant physical punishment. The politics and dynamics of the locker room would shift immediately based on this one segment. From a storytelling perspective, the return and assault opened numerous potential directions. Would Drew McIntyre return seeking revenge, setting up a blood feud between two legitimate tough guys? Would Brock's rampage continue, targeting other top stars in similar fashion? Would someone step up to challenge the Beast and stop his path of destruction? Would this tie into championship storylines or remain a separate, personal rivalry? The possibilities were endless, which is exactly what makes such moments effective in wrestling. The technical execution of the segment deserves recognition. Brock Lesnar's offense looked devastating because it is devastating. Those suplexes are legitimate throws performed by a former UFC champion who knows how to use leverage and technique to maximum effect. Drew McIntyre's selling of the punishment was exceptional, making each impact look catastrophic, his body language conveying both the physical damage and the psychological shock of being so thoroughly dominated. Together, they created something that felt real in a way that most wrestling segments don't. The camera work throughout the segment captured every brutal moment. Wide shots showed the full scope of Lesnar's physical dominance, close-ups caught the expressions of pain and determination on both men's faces, and the angles on the suplexes and knee drops emphasized their impact and danger. The production team understood the assignment, filming this less like a typical wrestling segment and more like the documentation of a legitimate assault. The absence of Paul Heyman from the segment was a fascinating choice. Heyman's eloquent promos usually provide context and motivation for Brock's actions, giving audiences a narrative framework to understand what's happening. Without him, this felt more primal, more instinct-driven, more dangerous. It suggested that Brock had returned not because of some carefully crafted plan, but simply because he wanted to hurt someone, and that's a terrifying motivation for a character as physically capable as the Beast incarnate. As the days following the assault passed, the wrestling world remained consumed by discussion and speculation. WWE teased updates on Drew's condition through social media and their various platforms, maintaining the ambiguity about how badly he had been hurt. Medical terminology was thrown around, references to rib injuries and concussion protocol, blurring the lines between storyline and reality in the way that modern wrestling does so effectively. The attack also served to re-establish Brock Lesnar at the absolute top of WWE's hierarchy. During his absence, other stars had risen, new main eventers had emerged, and the landscape had shifted. This assault was a reminder that regardless of who had been succeeding while he was gone,